The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.
Welcome back to the Savage Nation. We're going to talk about the Obama You Don't Know, an amazing 10-part series that appeared today in the Washington Examiner. The executive editor is Mark Tapscott, who joins us. This should be a book. Mr. Tapscott, welcome to the Savage Nation.
Well, what motivated?
Unbelievable. What motivated this 10-part series on Mr. Obama?
Well, we are just a bunch of journalists here that wanted to know the truth and felt like things had not been vetted properly in the 2008 campaign, and so we decided to take another look at Mr. Obama and his account of his life and his experiences, and we found some things that he apparently forgot.
Well, aren't you violating the protocols of Pravda by daring to publish such a series without asking permission of Mr. Obama himself?
Well, my understanding of journalism is that we're supposed to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. So
you don't ascribe to the Dan Rather, Tom Brokaw, NBC, ABC School of Journalism. In your first chapter, A Childhood of Privilege, Not Hardship, you pretty much blow the lid off the myth that the Obamas suffered somewhat as a child. In fact, they had a kind of plush childhood. Both of them did. Isn't that true?
Well, as a matter of fact, Barack Obama especially had, we have to admit, he did have some difficulties in his childhood because of his parents' situation. Any of us would if we were in the same kind of deal.
Yes.
But from the perspective of the kind of opportunities that he had, the social milieu that he was able to grow up in, the economic status that he had as he was growing up, it certainly was not an underprivileged childhood.
So chapter 1, I read the article for the audience today on the Savage Nation, A Childhood of Privilege, Not Hardship in Hawaii. It was very interesting. What is chapter 2 about in the series in your newspaper, the Washington Examiner?
Well, you may recall from the 2008 campaign, a great deal was made of the fact that he called himself a constitutional law professor at the University of Chicago.
Right.
And in fact, he wasn't actually a professor. He was a lecturer. Which is kind of a...
Oh, wait a minute. Now, look, you and I both know that's simply not that big a deal to the Democrat, whether you're a lecturer or a professor. It's more or less... If you feel you're a professor, aren't you a professor?
Well, if you're a professor, you are going to very likely have tenure and a much higher salary. If you're a lecturer, you basically are a part-time contract employee. It makes a big difference.
But you say in chapter 2, the myth of the rock star professor. What does that refer to?
Well, Time magazine described him as precisely that, a rock star professor. And we went in and looked at the student evaluations of Barack Obama, the students who actually took his courses over the 11 years that he was a lecturer. And their ratings, the first 2 years, he was pretty popular, but from that point forward, he steadily went down, and in the last 4 or 5 years, he was among the least popular of the professors. So,
well, here's the part in your article that really really struck my. Okay, Obama's byline did not appear in a single legal journal while he took. Does that mean he never wrote a legal article?
Right, that's exactly what it means. He did write
Isn't that unusual for a law school professor not to write a single legal article?
Well, it's especially unusual for a law school professor, and it's especially unusual for a law school lecturer at the University of Chicago, who people who have those positions then and now are expected to publish legal articles. And in fact, 3 of the folks that were also lecturers at the time Obama was there and who were also sitting federal judges published between them about 170 such pieces. So it can be done. He just had
well, no, as a former university person myself, I certainly know what you're referring to, but the average listener doesn't understand what you're saying, I don't think. You say federal Judge Richard Posner, who was at the same faculty at the same time, published 132 articles between 1993 and 2004, and federal Judge Frank Easterbrook, also a legal scholar on the same faculty, published 32 legal articles from 92 to 2004, while Obama published no such articles.
The legal article in that context is very simply this: legal professors, lawyers, academics, judges, and so forth talk and debate and discuss with each other through legal journals, law journals, about issues that are currently in focus in the courts or have been or may be in the future. And it's very much part of the ongoing legal community's discussion about what the law means and how it should be administered. He didn't participate in that.
What about when he was at Harvard Law? How did he become the editor of the Law Review? How did that happen if he hadn't published anything?
What we found in looking at that, and we actually did not include this material in the special report that was published today, the whole process for becoming the head of the Harvard Law Review at that time was very much a political process. And contrary to the story that was put out at 2008, he was not a unanimous choice by any means. He was not even the only minority candidate. There were 3 others. And ironically, after literally, I believe, about 17 hours in this marathon political bargaining session among all the candidates and the voters on the review staff, Obama emerged the winner when the small caucus of conservative students on the staff, law students on the staff, for reasons known only to them, threw their support behind Obama.
Wow. Sounds like they were Republicans of today in some regard. But the myth of the rock star professor is very intriguing, and it's part of a larger series, of course, the Obama You Don't Know. If you, as the executive editor of this series, were to be asked, what do you think is the greatest revelation in all 10 chapters, could you reduce it to the single biggest revelation?
I think the most surprising one is that we found an obscure case while Obama was practicing law in Chicago where he defended a slumlord in Chicago who had tossed out a bunch of his low-income tenants.
Oh, no, that's such an important story. Mark, that's a big one. I remember that now. He was a lawyer representing a slumlord, and the slumlord evicted, was it not poor black people from a housing project after cutting off their electricity and water?
Absolutely, and refusing to turn it back on for a month. And what he did is he forced them out without benefit of an eviction process, which basically told them to get lost.
Obama was the legal eagle behind this?
He was the slumlord's lawyer, and there's more to it than that even. But the bottom line on that particular case is Obama got him off with a $50 fine. The man was prominent.
That's a big fine. That's a big fine in Chicago political circles. $50.
Common in those days, and probably point isn't either. But the man, the slumlord that we're talking about, is Reverend Brazier, who was a slumlord, a pastor in a very big church, and most important, was very much a figure in the liberal political establishment in Chicago and a big, big backer of Barack Obama.
I think we need to go back to this because, truthfully, if Romney had any, well, let's put it this way, Romney should mention this slumlord past. No matter what is asked of him, he should work it into his answers. He won't do that, of course. He's too nice a man. But I was shocked to read this, that Obama was the lawyer, never mind professor. It was after law school. He was a lawyer who represented a slumlord who turned off the heat and water to the poor and then threw them out in the streets without any alternate housing. And Obama orchestrated the whole thing as the lawyer. Is that more or less a fair summary of what you discovered?
Well, I wouldn't say that he orchestrated the whole process. What he did do, without any doubt, is he defended the process and got the slumlord off with a $50 fine.
Isn't that politics as usual in Chicago, though?
Very much, and that's exactly the point. Obama has presented himself over the years as an idealistic civil rights lawyer, community organizer who's interested in helping the poor, and an idealistic politician. The truth is, based on what we found, the truth is he's really just another Chicago machine politician.
The series is The Obama You Don't Know in the Washington Examiner, 10 parts. I posted it up on michaelsavage.com. I'm looking forward to reading a piece of it every day. But that, to me, it was the greatest shock. In other words, all the other stuff I was very interested in the details, about the invented hardship. Really, it was privilege, this and that. The association with seedy people, no publication of law articles. But I had no idea that he was a sleazy lawyer for a slumlord. That unto itself should sink his campaign, I would think, Mark. I know you're a journalist, and I'm not a journalist. I'm a rebellious commentator, so I'm allowed to say things like that. But don't you think that would be a revelation in the campaign?
Well, this should have been a revelation in the 2008 campaign. It wasn't, because so many of my colleagues in the media, unfortunately, have been and continue to be conscious or unconscious. Doesn't really make any difference. The bottom line is they're basically protecting and advocating on behalf of Obama. And that.
What has the reaction been to your series? Just appeared today, didn't it, Mark? So have you had any response from the so-called mainstream media?
Nothing directly. I'm sure that we will, and frankly, we expect a very negative reaction from the White House. And I suspect that a good part of the news media will ignore it because, frankly, it ought to embarrass them. They didn't report this.
Chapter 10, Obama brings Chicago politics to Washington, and one of your editors writes, Chicago has been called the home of gangster government. How bad is it? And you spell it out. Gangster government, how bad is it? Many of us in America believe that we have gangster government running the country today. You think that that's a fair analysis?
Absolutely, I do. And the editor who coined that term, gangster government, is Michael Barone, who many of your listeners, I'm sure, are familiar with because he's one of the editors and was the founder of the Almanac of American Politics, which is an absolutely essential source for anybody who's really interested in what's happening in American politics. And
you say that... I'm sorry. You say Barone defined gangster government as using the powers of public office, quote, to transfer the property of one group of people to another group that is politically favored, close quote. Boy, does that ever describe what's going on in this country today with the fake solar contracts, with stimulus funds that have disappeared, trillions of dollars gone up in smoke. We don't even know where the money is.
Well, actually, we do know where it is. It's in the pockets of Obama's friends and political supporters.
Well, isn't that a crime?
Well, let's not forget we're talking about Chicago politicians, and they are the world's masters at covering their tracks. It's very difficult to prove. But the bottom line is, as we report, 3 of every 4 of the $20 billion in clean energy loans that have gone out under Obama went to companies that his supporters, friends and political donors, own, manage, or otherwise have an interest in.
You quote the book Throw Them All Out, the 2011 book by Peter Schweitzer, and you say that 31 Obama bundlers and big donors whose firms receive more than $16 billion in clean energy loans and grants include Gore, Silicon Valley venture capital king John Doerr, Sergey Brin, that's of Google, Dan Reicher and Larry Page of Google, Jim Rogers of Duke Energy, Tesla Motors, Elon Musk, and CNN founder Ted Turner. How did Ted Turner wind up getting a clean energy loan? For what?
Well, it's a company that he has an interest in, and I don't remember the specific details of his. But
well, you know what? Well, here's the thing, Mark. This should be discussed by Romney. This is what Romney should be talking about, don't you think?
Well, I certainly think anybody who's interested in what's going to happen in this election ought to be talking about it because it's, bears directly on whether or not the incumbent president should get another 4 years. If you want 4 more years of that stuff, vote for him.
Yeah, with reappropriation of people's money. Incredible. The Obama You Don't Know, 10-part series by the Washington Examiner. With us on this topic was Mark Tapscott, the executive editor. And Mark, I want to thank you very much. I will be reading from this over the next few days. Incredible journalism. I'm proud to be an American today, and I'm proud to say there's still a journalism alive in the country.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mark. I'll be right back on the Savage Nation.
Savage. The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.